Surrounded by Vampires, or How to Slay the Time, Energy, and Soul Suckers in Your Life by Thomas Erikson. Summary. Spot the vampires around you and vanish their influence for good. Do you often feel exhausted by conversations? Are there people in your life who belittle you through words or actions? Or do you have colleagues who take up all your time? You could be surrounded by vampires. Be it time, energy, attention, or habit vampires, these ubiquitous social villains can leave you feeling drained and depleted. Whether they're lurking in your office, hiding amongst friends and family, or invading your thoughts, vampires can be found all around you. Fortunately, no vampire can survive when the sun shines on them. With the help of the behavioural model made famous in Surrounded by Idiots, international best-selling author and behavioural expert Thomas Erikson will help you recognize and banish the vampires in your life. Introduction. The time I almost gave up. Once, many years ago, I was sitting on a spongy office chair in my local bank branch, working away, oblivious to the fact that my life was about to take a drastic turn. Strangely enough, I can't recall exactly what I was doing on this particular occasion, but it's safe to assume it was something that wouldn't have any effect at all on anybody's life. All I can say for certain is that I was following some corporate order or other. I was simply toiling away, carrying out my everyday tasks without giving too much thought to how or why. This already raises an interesting question. Why was I doing this? The purpose behind my mere presence at the office where I was employed was shrouded in the deepest of mysteries. Even to this day, more than 30 years later, I remain unable to give any insightful explanation as to why I buried myself in that soul-draining work. I was only there because of a series of chance events. I would get up in the mornings, wake up my family, make breakfast, go to work, do my work, go home, make dinner, watch television for an hour, and then go to bed. Surely there was more or less the life most people led. So what was the problem? The problem was a rather subtle one. It's not that there was anything terribly wrong with my work, it just didn't feel rewarding to me at all. And because of that, it wasn't right for me. To be absolutely frank with you, I was often unmotivated at work. You could even say I was lethargic. I can assure you the state of mind did nothing to boost my performance. When you're feeling listless and drained of energy, the challenge is identifying the true cause. In my case, as I would eventually become keenly aware, there wasn't just one problem, but several. The main one was that my actual work tasks were largely mind-numbingly dull. I may have been able to put up with that if it weren't for the fact that the entire banking sector in Sweden was undergoing a crisis at the time. The banking slump was the result of a deep recession, which mainly impacted the financial system, but also the real estate market. What about the banking sector itself? Those of us who worked in bank branches bore the brunt of it all, as we were the ones who had to listen to angry customers' reactions to events and decisions that we didn't understand any better than they did. Nobody had asked us if we wanted to lay waste to several billions worth of capital. We were overworked and underpaid, which did nothing to improve my motivation. For the record, mistakes had been made in the banking sector, there's no denying that. Huge, painfully expensive mistakes. But this had all gone on so far above our own heads that we had no influence at all over the decisions being made. All these events, which went on for several years, were exhausting for me. I was stuck in my seat, unable to do anything about the whole disaster. It was like living in a state of mental limbo. If energy drinks could have helped, I would have chugged them endlessly. When the crisis passed and the dust settled, people ended up losing their jobs. Our clients went bankrupt and families were driven out of their homes. My role, which involved interacting with the least fortunate of these, saw me witnessing men and women break down in tears on a daily basis. Even so, perhaps I could have coped with all of that if I hadn't also had the misfortune of working with a number of colleagues who habitually drained me of an almost unbelievable amount of energy. Some days, their attitudes and ways of responding to and handling the situation left me feeling as if I had been robbed of my entire will to live. In fact, any of these situations would probably have been manageable one at a time. I'm a fairly stable person, and I've been to hell and back more than once. My experiences have strengthened me, but at the time I was still a fairly young man who hadn't developed any real strategies for tackling this. Most difficult of all, I still lacked any real understanding of where this hopelessness I was feeling really came from. All I knew was that I would come home at night feeling drained and that I was irritable and frustrated much of the time. One serious cause was that I was doing the wrong kind of work. Anybody who has been in the wrong job before knows how exhausting it can be to try to feel even the mildest enthusiasm when you're constantly aware of how much you detest the work you need to do. To further complicate things, corporate leadership wasn't interested at all in listening to the frustrations of their workforce. Instead of providing us with clear guidance and strong leadership, they sent us to motivational seminars. In many cases, these were actually quite entertaining. I laughed in recognition at a lot of stuff, as did most of the other people in the room. But as it turned out, inspirational seminars, however inspiring, solved absolutely none of our actual problems. Listening to some bundle of energy on a big stage explain to us how all we had to do was apply some positive thinking was certainly captivating, but strangely, it did nothing to help us handle being the object of our client's fit of rage. If you've ever had a boss who tried to give you a pep talk when what you really needed was specific answers, I'm sure you know the feeling. However, the most interesting thing was the fact that several of my colleagues exhibited some rather unusual behavior. One woman was so work-averse that she used to begin nearly every work week with a sick day. Her accounts of her various ailments became more and more fanciful as the months went by. As you are no doubt aware, accusing a co-worker who may be sick of putting on an act might be perceived as less than helpful. However, I had to draw the line when she returned from a 2-week leave of absence because a ladybug bit her thumb. She hated taking directions, and she tried to get away with doing the bare minimum whenever she was given a task to do. Now I've learned that she was displaying what psychologists call passive-aggressive behavior, which involves seeking to avoid all personal responsibility. As far as I know, she's still at it today. We were in an open office of sorts. The guy I shared desks with never seemed to shut up. It didn't matter if he was busy working or pouring coffee down his throat, his mouth was always running ceaselessly. For the life of me, I couldn't tell you what he was actually talking about. All of my energy was spent trying to block him out of my mind. He was loud, bombastic, and highly needy in terms of other people's attention. Whenever some of our more notable clients would visit, he unleashed his entire repertoire. He was a bona fide drama queen, a type you'll be reading more about later on in this book. Another of my co-workers seemed to be incredibly dedicated to sabotaging our attempts to meet deadlines. He would slow the entire team down, thanks to his horrendous sense of discipline. I still find him popping up in my mind whenever I find myself thinking about inefficient people. He never did what he was told to do, or at least never on time. He never took any notes, and he rarely remembered what was said. He was completely clueless. According to his wife, he was just the same at home. How he was able to keep his life together at all astonishes me. One thing, however, was beyond all doubt. Having to work with him felt a lot like being punished. Worse than all that, however, was his habit of constantly trying to shift the blame and paint himself as the victim of unfortunate circumstances. If he hadn't been given incomplete instructions, he'd run afoul of some unreasonably angry clients. When he wasn't complaining about how management didn't appreciate his work, he was harping on about how he'd been unable to sleep since childhood and how this has made him chronically exhausted. And considering how bad his pay was, what could anyone really expect? He displayed telltale signs of chronic victimhood. Although he wasn't the worst offender, one thing was clear though, nobody really had any clue how to handle him. So far, I haven't even mentioned the coworker who refused to do any real work at all, probably because they were busy having an affair with the office manager. As the crisis deepened, I was assigned clients who had been designated as financially troubled. That is, the ones who had had their houses and homes taken away because of unpaid credit. The days without meetings with teary-eyed clients were few and far between. The mental pressure was unbearable. I hadn't even turned 30 yet, and I was certainly not a therapist. The whole situation, with my difficult colleagues, angry clients, and leadership team preoccupied with the goings-on in the stratosphere of upper management, was bad enough in itself. I was also consuming all the news I could get my hands on and constantly reading about the seeming avalanche of unfolding disasters within the banking world. One of the major evening tabloids in Sweden ran a series of anti-banking campaigns that made me feel like a criminal. My mood fell even further, and the whole mess ended up having a serious negative impact on my marriage. I became ill-tempered and stressed out, and I struggled with a deep sense of hopelessness. In the long term, my marriage crumbled too. My work and the difficult conditions I had to contest with weren't the only causes, of course, but they definitely helped give a good strong push in the wrong mental direction. I don't think it's an unreasonable assumption that I would have succumbed to some kind of depression if I had carried on like that. This situation was a hard one, but I want to be clear that I'm not claiming to be a victim here. I still had my job after all. I was able to feed my family, I was young and strong. I had my whole future ahead of me, but I would be lying if I claimed it wasn't hard going. What would have happened if someone had sat down and explained to me why the people around me were behaving as they were? If I had understood how these co-workers were draining me, and most of the people they interacted with, of so much energy? If I had been given an introduction to the subject of this book, I bet my attitude would have changed significantly. I suspect I wouldn't have reacted as strongly to the behaviors of certain co-workers. I also think I could have been of more use to myself, my clients, and my family.